What is up, PartnerUp? I'm here with my co-host, Jared Fuller. You like that, Jared?
Stole it again.
You have been, dude, it's been crazy. I feel like we just need to take a minute and catch our breath here. So you have a new baby, you get hit by a hurricane, like we're trying to pull off the biggest B2B partnerships event ever. I feel like this is our podcast recording session, but I almost feel like we just need to kind of like, how you feeling, man?
Joint therapy session.
Yeah, it could be a joint therapy session.
Dear Abby, dear Ivy, we're dating ourselves for those columns. People are like, "Dear Abby, what's that?"
I had our colleague Will. I called him Bono. I said he looked like Bono the other day. He said he wasn't sure who Bono was. It made me feel old. But dude, you gotta give me what's your gut right now? What are you feeling? Because I want to talk about the future, and I want to get specific. I want to talk specifically about how we talk about how partnerships changing, go to market, but I want to get into the nitty gritty of like what that looks like department by department. You down?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. I noticed you have a nice t-shirt on today, by the way.
Yeah, I'll stand up. Look, Praxis. Yeah. There we go.
Yep.
Shout out to we occasionally wear swag of each other's past companies. So
yeah.
discoverpraxis.com was I've placed a bunch of people through the program. So yeah, got a nice t-shirt.
Or friends companies. I have a platform marketing hat on today. Tim Shermack, a great business owner with a marketing agency. No, but I want to dive into this. This is obviously like the way that the structure of our upcoming PLX summit is each day focuses on a different part of the business. But that came about for a reason. Like you had I think you had like an all-nighter because the next morning you're like, I have this idea, Isaac. This is it. The PLX summit. How did this come about? Like, first, let's just start there.
Yeah. So you have to choose your own hard, and like, I think some context and actually telling the story a little bit of PartnerHacker is it's a developing, unfolding story. So like, why this idea? Why now? It's amazing what happens when the world changes around you and you decide to change too. What do I mean by that? Well, Isaac, we were sitting here looking at, we were at my house, I think back in, I don't know, May, and we had this like plan for the future, right? It was like, hey, here's exactly what we're going to go do. And I think like literally the next day or the next week, it was like the worst market day of our lifetimes. And we've been building PartnerHacker in an inflationary environment that you and I have never seen, in a world climate that's undeniably, let's say the temperatures are just higher, right? In terms of like not the personal climate, like how we feel, everything's a bit elevated and escalated. And basically that plan, instead of like, okay, we got to execute this plan, it was like wartime. So there's a great piece by Ben Horowitz, about peacetime versus wartime CEOs. And I've read it enough times in the past 3-4 years, or 8 years since he probably originally wrote it, to where I just knew it was a wartime moment. Meaning, we were going to go do a bunch of stuff around like life's too short to work for a CEO that doesn't care about partnerships. So career related. That's a really terrible business idea, right? Imagine if we went all in on careers during like the worst market of our lifetime. It would have been probably a business ending decision, right? Even though we had a lot of traction and interest. And so we had to like figure out what worked. What were we really good at? And that's where I like had that all-nighter, and I was thinking about the journey from an aggregator to a platform. So like, we're not a platform for anybody. But there's some moments where we kind of are. And when are those moments? They're events. So we've built this aggregator where we're like trying to pull everyone together. And what we can do is we can platform the people that are speaking to this partnerships moment, right? Like if you go back a month earlier, we released, the manifesto, trust is the new data. And people started to share it and talk about it, and it became lexicon. And we had ecosystem week, right? So that was a great event, a phenomenal event. And I
Shout
think,
out to Partner Stack.
yeah, shout out to Partner Stack, Tyler Calder, the whole team there. They were phenomenal to work with on Ecosystem Week. What I realized was, in order for us to really get to the next phase as a business, now I won't talk about the strategic reason why it matters for the market. We can talk about that next. But as a business, why it became so important to realize we needed to establish a platform and highlight these other voices was that the rest of the world was hurting, right? So like the marketing department was hurting, the sales department was hurting, the success department, like every single department was hurting. And we needed to provide a way for this partnership's positive message to get into those swim lanes and provide us clarity and focus. I mean, we had no shortage of ideas. How many things do we have in spreadsheets and stuff like that? It's really been a good forcing function. So I think, coming up with the event from a business decision was the right thing to do. Obviously was the right thing to do. Definitely hard, but it perhaps saved PartnerHacker.
Yeah, it's so interesting that as you mentioned, just with with the economic changes, and all of a sudden people are shrinking their teams and not hiring and laying off, and every one of those presents a challenge and an opportunity, right? The challenge is, okay, everybody in our market is kind of playing defense and they're in freak out mode, and the opportunity is everybody's also getting hammered on their costs, on their acquisition challenges, on trying to do more without hiring more teammates. You can't just throw more money and more salespeople at it in a market like that. So the conversations get realer, right? And this is one of those opportunities to say, in a market that's going great and there's a lot of money flowing around and people are just hiring, building big teams, and they can kind of not feel the pressure to show as immediate ROI, trying to go to a product leader or a sales leader or a marketing leader or a success leader or a CEO and say, hey, we should talk about why partnerships should be a more integral part of your strategy. It's easier to say, yeah, right? In a tough market, it's like, what? New ideas? New ideas? Give me ideas. What do you got? I'm
Right.
all ears, right? And so that's what I think is really interesting here, because we launched PartnerHacker not long ago at all, as you mentioned, like earlier this year, and talking to people in partnerships is phenomenal, right? That's our core audience. That's our early adopter audience, if you will, to use this sort of crossing the chasm idea. But this is so much bigger of a conversation than that, and it's a huge challenge to take on, to say, we want to bridge those gaps and start saying, okay, where are all the people who are talking about what it's like to build a success team or marketing or sales or product? We want to have conversations about partnerships with them, relevant to them, right? Get them thinking this way. It's like trying to take on, 4 or 5 new verticals all at
Well,
once.
I think I want to use this to codify the point I was developing that you asked about originally, Isaac, was like, how did this idea come about? Is we originally had a bunch of areas of the business we were going to go invest in that were all, um, I would say, at risk, right? They were no longer, I could no longer look through those opportunities through the lens of like growth opportunities. So, meaning we had to create growth opportunities in the midst of a down market, right? So like we're creating opportunity in the midst of contraction. And that means it's a stretch. It means it's hard, but there's an opportunity. And the opportunity was, well, this is premature, but we kind of have to do it. The partnerships moment is here. There's a partner community that is developing. There is a partnerships ecosystem. It exists. We live in it every day. Someone can't tell us that doesn't exist. The fact that this podcast exists, Partner Hacker Daily, partnerhacker.com, all of this stuff, the handbook, not to mention all the other great people, Partnernomics, Fernio, partnerships leaders, like we could just go on to great tech companies. Is we had to stretch. We had to go, okay, so what are we going to do if it's not beefing up the department?
Yep.
And that's where there's so I love conversations with you, is where we get to talk about things like first principles, business decisions, why, and mental models. There's a mental model of invert. And if you go down to the basic thing that we were talking about, is partnerships as a department was having a moment. Well, if you invert, well, what if partnerships is not a department? All of a sudden everything changes. Like,
Yeah,
because it's a
the
foundational.
partnerships department feels like it's having a moment because there's something more fundamental that's actually having a moment.
Exactly. Right. So what if partnerships is not a department? Well, what other questions would we ask? Why is that even a valid? It just changes your frame of reference from something that is like, hey, we're in a little growth sliver in a down market to, well, how does this affect everything else? If this is a growth sliver amidst a down market, doesn't that mean that there's wider opportunity? And of course it does. And I think that's been my biggest lesson in all of PartnerHacker was like, okay, we made this business decision and I was looking for some lexicon to like, how do we tie this all together? And it was like, well, we just have to bring it to every department. And it started with like PL something like partner led.
Yep.
It's like, okay, it's going to be partner led just because
Partner-led growth, partner-led companies, partner-led go-to-market, something.
Right. And that was just to ride on the coattails of product led, right?
Yep.
Like another mental model, like something that I'll never forget. Like, again, I say the same 20 things like thousands of times versus trying to say 1,000 things is innovate, don't invent, a famous Steve Jobs quote, right? Apple didn't need to be first to the phone. They just had to be best, right? And in that regard, it was like, okay, what if it's not partner-led growth? And then it's PLG, and that kind of doesn't really work. What if it's partner-led everything, right? And the way that I think I had, like, by the time we started like really getting into it, I was like, I think it's PLX, and X is the variable. And I thought it was so important to tie together across like, well, why could this thing be true? Why could this PLX idea work? Well, we looked at what's been happening. What are the most popular news articles that we publish on PartnerHacker, Isaac? They're about VCs.
Yeah, exactly. The venture capitalists, of which you've said this many times, founders are downstream of venture capitalists, typically in terms of like who are the founders kind of getting their thought leadership from.
Yeah, I don't even know if we've talked about that on the podcast. I think that might have just been all my PLX pitches.
Yeah, we've
right?
and like, okay, that's shaping the strategies and approaches of founders. And those founders, by the way, of these early startups, they're the future leaders of big startups and of enterprise as well, right? So you can see what's happening. If VCs today are just starting to talk about this, that's where companies as a whole are going. And this is what I want to ask you something about. This is really interesting because when it comes to the partnerships moment, as it relates to partnerships professionals, we are right on time. We're in the right place at the right time. Anybody working in partnerships is. The moment among people in the partnerships department is here. When it comes to PLX, partner-led product, sales, marketing, et cetera, we're a little early. And that can be a big challenge. We're early, right? Like these conversations are not really starting to happen yet. We're kind of trying to make them happen a little early. And so that's why I want to like put ourselves into the future and say, what's going to be totally normal by the end of this decade when it comes to each of these departments. And I'd love to kind of go one at a time, but I cut you off. You had a thought. You should finish that thought first. About VCs
it was
and
around
founders.
the VCs and the founders. It's the same train of thought, is that why aren't my colleagues that were CROs, CMOs, CCOs, CPOs, and even founders that I would say, I mean, I could name some good people that I believe, given my track record and what they've seen me do, they would say positive things of me, and they would even do favors for me. And yet, whatever the conversation would turn to partner, they were tuned out. Now, all of a sudden, they're coming inbound and asking for help. Like, there's just a shift. Like, that's not the same. I've experienced and worked with partnerships long enough to know there's something different here. Where is it coming from? It's not coming from just themselves or just the pain. It's coming from, come to find out, I started getting in conversations with a bunch of VCs and being invited to help them recruit their first VP of partner or chief partnerships officer, or being invited to a conversation on, hey, help us figure out our strategy for next year. Or, hey, we just got off a board call. Our board said, hey, next year's strategy is partner led. And I'm like, that VC said that? They said, yes, it's partner led. I'm like, well, so what's your plan? We don't have one. So like there are venture backed startups with a ton of money, Like we're talking, I mean, I've talked to VC backed startups that have 100 million plus cash on hand, that their boards got together and they said, hey, we need a partner led strategy for next year. That's new.
You know what this
Right.
makes me think of? In any new frontier, if you look in history, you usually have these two phases. You have the hunting and trapping phase first,
Interesting.
right? Right. The pioneers go out there and what do? They hunt and trap the resources because there's a lot more resources than there are people seeking them. So you go, you hunt and trap the furs and the meat and once more and more people move to that frontier, and now you got too many hunters for too few buffalo or whatever it is. What do you have to switch to? Farming, gardening, right? An ecosystem where you're not chasing down a lead, targeting it, right? Lobbing munitions at something. You are tending to a garden, to a flock, to an ecosystem. You're planting seeds and cultivating, right? That's partnerships. And that's the difference, right? The hunters, the targeters, the marketers, and the salespeople, when that gets really saturated, you at least have to have a mixed strategy. You go out and you do some hunting for some big game, but then you also are raising some chickens in a garden at the same time, right? Like, I think that's a fairly natural progression, and I think people who are on the edge of the market and whose job it is to kind of spot these trends a little bit ahead of time, they're seeing that. There's a reason those VCs are saying, okay, we want to invest in people. There's a ton of hunters out here on the frontier. If your whole strategy is we're going to hunt for meat, we want to invest in people who know a thing or two about farming and who have a strategy that's at least a mixed strategy.
It's an interesting analogy. Like I like the pioneer analogy. I think the thing that catches me a bit off guard is who's the pioneers.
It's any company entering a new field, right? We're still early in the software eating world, in the digital age. It's the digital frontier. It's software eating everything.
I
So
think software ate everything.
it's still doing it though. Look at how many functions most businesses operate where it's like there's still more. It's happening. It's spreading, and that's what I'm saying. It's getting saturated, right? So in the early era,
we're reaching this maturation phase
yes,
of B2B.
It's not a frontier anymore.
Yeah. Right. Like, I mean, we don't go into offices, right? Like everything inherently has to be a service, right? Delivered via technology, because what the heck else is there? Like, there's no more office. Like, there's no PartnerHacker headquarters.
So like in the first, the first time somebody said we're gonna create a software platform that makes your payroll and all this stuff super easy, and we're gonna sell it for $30 a month to a bunch of small businesses. That was a frontier, right? And you could actually win by literally just selling directly to your customers because you could hunt them down because there weren't any other hunters. Now, each of these fields, you've got 50
so B2B was a frontier, right?
Exactly.
It was a frontier. The pioneers that came in were like, okay, the first pioneers were, data companies, right? Or like, I'd say infrastructure companies. So like databases, right? Oracle, right? It's a perfect example. I mean, there's telco before, and then there was database companies, and then there became cloud companies and automation companies, right? There's like layers that are built on top of this, to that analogy.
And they extend to the smaller and smaller businesses until everybody's been hit. Everybody's been eaten by software.
So here's my question to you though. This PLX, I like, it's an interesting frame of reference. Is this a new frontier?
I think it's a new strategy. It's saying, hey, look, you're the guy that loads the guns, and you're the one that goes out there and does the tracking and trapping, and you're the one that shoots them, and you're the one that skins the animal. We got this whole process that involves all sorts of people based on hunting. Now the hunting's not so good. So we got to farm. Well, here's these people that have been farming all this time. They've been raising cattle and they've been gardening, and right? Yeah, those are the partnerships people. And they can tell you how for each of the things that you do, the person who's getting the meat and the person who's getting the fur and how to do that in a farming first strategy, how to do that in a context, right? And I like this analogy for other reasons too, because the things it brings to your mind is like, as a customer, do you want to be hunted down and like fired at? Or do you want to be tended to lovingly like a happy sheep in a pasture? You know what I mean? And there's something about like living in your ecosystem, caring about your ecosystem, investing in it, being a part of it. It's a way of thinking, and it applies to all these different components of the business versus that kind of, hey, there's resources out there to go take. There's targets to go hit, you know?
It's interesting how it feels like a new frontier, and yet it's not. Like we're connecting dots and establishing swim lanes. Um,
It's
I
how to
mean,
sustainably grow a business now that the frontier isn't new anymore.
it's no longer a frontier. It's from a
Yes.
frontier to a farmland,
Yes.
right? Like
Yep.
it, and then there's things getting built on top of it, manufacturing, distribution. Like, I mean, what are we talking about right now? It's like, I'll roll with this analogy a little bit more.
I might
Frontier.
be pushing the analogy
We're pushing the
way too
analogy,
far.
but like, hey, you've said learning out loud enough to where people don't do this. Like, people hate meetings because they get they're rife with I think lazy time sucking activities, you know, such as check-ins or status updates or things like that it's not worth a meeting. But like, for some people, their best creativity and intellectual capacity is shared in a group setting. Like, I learn the most when I'm talking with you. I learn a lot when I'm talking with you. So like, let's extend this analogy. Frontier to farmland to what? I mean, there's probably manufacturing, right? There's some like higher level orders of production. And then there is what? Interconnected commerce. I mean, it's woven into things like interstate commerce. Like, what are we doing right now, Isaac? We're building roads. That's what we're doing. Is like we're connecting, you know, it's not one frontier, it's many frontiers.
Mm.
And all of these frontiers now have amassed populations, and I might even say that they have farmland, right? But these farms are corporate owned walled gardens, right? They're not ecosystems, they're walled gardens. And then what we're doing is we're building right? So
Mm.
influence, we're building interstate commerce, right? Between these different systems of production in B2B. Like, if we were to think about the retail world and we were to strip out roadways, there's not much, right? Like it's like, okay, well, the roadway is a path to a customer. Have you been to LA?
Oh yeah.
Can you get anywhere?
Theoretically, you can get
Hours.
anywhere, but you just have to wait in
Hours.
traffic.
It's a horrible method of transportation, right? And I think what people are realizing, there needs to be another pathway, right? Like we're developing something on top of it. So I mean, I like it, and I think there's definitely something there. To tie it all back, I mean, what we're doing is we're establishing the swim lanes, the pathways, the interstate commerce between working together in these previously siloed or walled garden departments.
We should have given
Like,
a.
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a fine mental model. Like, if we inverted, partnership should not be a department. It instead should be a pathway. Like, it's the net to the neural net, right? It's the nodes. It's not the nodes themselves. It's the pathways that exist between the nodes. And how wide is the road? How much traffic can it carry? What's the throughput? Right? That's how strong your partnerships are. Like, a lot of people like to measure things in terms of X and Y. They really hate the Z axis. The Z axis messes up everyone's mind, right? It's input, output. Well, what about throughput?
Yeah.
Wait. What? Input, output, throughput is the measure of what you can put in and what you can get out. Guess what? Your IO is lacking throughput. It's the XYZ. Partnerships is the Z. It's the
Yeah.
throughput. It's how do you grow and build those interconnected things in this new world, this ecosystem centric world. So that was like a new analogy right there, learning out loud. IO throughput. That's
Yep.
what we're talking
Yep.
about.
Yeah. No, that input out. Yeah. It kind of made me think of inbound, outbound, nearbound, the reveal
Ooh, yeah, shout
nomenclature
out.
they've been. Yeah. By the way, I'm going to just issue a quick trigger warning to anyone who has a strong aversion to mixed metaphors. We're
already
just
went through it.
layering them on top of each other. Swim lanes on the highway to the farm, who knows? But hey, so what does this mean? These early conversations in these other departments about being partner led, what does that look like? So like put yourself in the future. What does a partner led product team look like?
I think it would be very egotistical of me to say I know what that looks like. Um, what I think is so interesting about developing these watering holes, right, where we're bringing these people together, is that those conversations and that serendipity of collision. So lots of loaded words there. Collision, I believe it was popularized to me by a gentleman named Tony Hsieh. Tony was the founder of Zappos, the most customer-centric organization you've probably ever seen. If you ever used to order shoes through Zappos, some people still do. You get all these moments of surprise and delight. Like you place an order and they'd be like, "Oh, free shipping," and it's there the same day. But it wasn't Prime; it was just a surprise, right? Or you could famously call Zappos support and like order a pizza, and they would get it to you. Like they took it so crazy. But what Tony said is he brought the Collision conference to Las Vegas, and he talked about, rebuilding downtown Vegas. That's where I started my first SaaS company, Job Hive, was a part of this downtown project. He's like, Vegas lacked collision. It lacked serendipity for the startup community, right? So he was trying to put all these startup founders and ecosystem people in one spot back in 2014. May he rest in peace. Tony very sadly passed this past year. And I think that is what we're looking to do. If you truly want to be a gardener, a market maker, a category creator, I think you need to pick an undeniable shift and not control the conversation or the output, but you need to create more serendipity and collision, right? Like, why is everyone in the world talking about if there's two macro trends that are undeniable? If I look at the most popular podcasts in the world, news media coverage, everything, and not just like CNBC business, the All In podcast, like what are people talking about? Two things: HubSpot, their keynotes, community, and media, right? Every company should be its own media company. Isaac, did you see this? This might be news to a lot of people on here. I was in a hotel in Miami this weekend, prior to the hurricane. Then I drove into the hurricane, and I saw this advertisement on CNBC for a new television series called Shift. Have you heard of this?
No.
It's a television series produced by Salesforce. I shit you
No
not.
way.
I'm not kidding. Not kidding
That's
at all.
wild.
It's produced by Salesforce, an entire television series. And I'm like, that's so right. I mean, like we're trying to build a media company, be able to produce quality content. Like I have visions of getting there, right? And just to see Salesforce come out and do that, or HubSpot, right? The age of the connected customer, community-led growth, blah, 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 blah. We're all saying and speaking to the same thing, in that attention is an asset, right? And then what's the other measure of attention is trust, right? You might have been able to interrupt me and grab my attention, but you can't hold it, right? You can't hold it at all. So it's not enough to be able to interrupt, because the interruptions are getting increasingly more expensive. That's advertising, right? If interruptions are cheap, no problem, right? I can interrupt you enough times to where you're going to remember me. If interruptions are extremely expensive and everyone's trying to interrupt me, impossible. How do I hold your attention? It's that trust. So I think I kind of almost lost where I was going there with that one. But those are the macro trends.
I want to pin you on, because like I feel like there's some pretty easy things to discuss related to how.
So product. You were starting with product teams.
Yeah, I want to pin you on product. If you're a product leader,
so
how do you get ahead of this?
So that's my long way of saying that what we're doing, what I really want to do with PartnerHacker is, like, I don't want to tell people how to build their product organizations.
Yeah.
What I want to do is I want to build the system where the mind share is available and it's prioritized and it's trustworthy to think in a partner-led way as a product company, right? So I want to bring the facts, the insights, the people, the proof, the trust, and aggregate all of that crap. So that way, if I'm a CPO or I'm a VP of product and I just got hired into a seed stage or Series A company or an early company or a big company and it's a new division, I'm thinking, how the heck do I make sure I'm not feeling and thinking about my product myopically through my own lens and not living in market? That has to exist to where I can operate and have 20, 30, 40% of my bandwidth dedicated to that. So that's for, the future of product. And that, of course, goes across each day. So I think generally speaking, that's how I think about why we're so important to this and the community and everyone listening today. Then I could maybe geek out a little bit on like what it actually means for each department. But I think that macro trend of like establishing that mind share it's so important for you to think about as a partnerships professional too. Like
Yeah.
you have to make it easy for your counterpart to think about you.
Yes. Yes. If you want to enlist someone in a cause, in a point of view, in an approach, make it exciting and enticing. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't mean that you're pretending that they won't have any additional work or challenges, but you're enlisting them in a vision, in something that they can believe in, they can sink their teeth in. And so to connect those dots, let's say to your product team, you've got to understand from a high level, like what does that mean? What is it? What is a product roadmap that is crafted by the market that it lives in, that is informed by that, living in market,
Well,
not just its customers, but it's like the roadmap is not this thing that comes from your head from on high as a central planner and you say, here's where we're going. It's something that should be constantly informed and reinformed from your customers, which I think startups are getting much, much better at this with the product, product-led growth type things, but also the other companies and the other products out there that your customers are using. Those partner, like anyone you're partnering with, there's some percentage of that roadmap that's got to be coming from them as well, right? Like, because I think that's the conversation that partner people will be like, well, I can't if I have something that's a feature or a product decision that would be a huge benefit to our partner strategy. The product team's like, yeah, that gets lower down on my roadmap. Right now, I'm not going to tell you where that should rank. Obviously, I'm not in a position to do that, but I think realizing that you can't win if you're solely asking your customers. You need to be asking your customers, but you need to also be asking your partners, right? The people that are also that your customers trust besides you. What is valuable to them in your product, and how can you make your product one that they want to build with, on top of, in, around? That's where that stickiness comes.
I actually want to approach it from a different vector. So you're not wrong. You're 100% correct in your analysis. I think there's something deeper here. There's phenomenal reads like "Ego is the Enemy," or I got it grilled into my head at Drift with David Cancel and Elias Torres. Um, I think the job to be done for product orgs, seeing Elias manage and build, product teams, that they were most excited when they solved a customer problem from a support call that they were on and shipped a fix the same day. I had never seen that before.
Mm.
Like I'd never seen a product team that had to be on support calls every day. So as like an engineer, as a PM, as a whatever, you had to be on support calls every day. Why? Well, it's much easier to, like if your frame of reference is your own view of the world, that's less information. It's less noisy, it's less complicated. It might be, simple, not easy, right? So to code that thing that solves a massive problem, it's simple, not easy. Very complex in terms of its execution, but the number of inputs or parameters are actually small. The second that you open that up to talking to customers every day and understanding their business, it becomes complex, not difficult. And you're like, complex, not difficult. Well, maybe instead of solving that thing through some incredibly challenging, again, simple, not easy, engineering challenge, you're solving it through this complex interconnectedness, right? So what ends up happening is you end up seeing the world through an entirely different lens, which is not your own. I think that's the product orgs of the future go back to first principles. Like, what is Amazon's mission statement? Amazon's mission statement is not something that you might think it is if you've never heard it. It's to become the most customer-centric company in the world. That's it. It's pretty customer-centric. I mean, the experience is pretty phenomenal and it operates with everything. I mean, it's just eaten everything because the experience is so interconnected to everything that I do. Every product I want, the speed, the review, like it has everything. I mean, even my favorite new television series, right? Like the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power, dude, it is so good. It is So it makes, for the Game of Thrones fans out there, it just makes Game of Thrones look like, oh man, that was just all shock value. Whereas this stuff, this content is next level. But they're bringing that all together. It's this incredible approach. So I think the product orgs of the future live in the customers, right? They almost have embedded support, and they understand their customer's business and how it operates. Because the second that you do that, you go, oh, I'm not fixing this. Like, I'm not creating a net new solution to solve for this problem. I need to help them, which might mean working with these other things, or interoperating, or opening up an endpoint.
So, so
To
you
shift
gave
your
me
mindset.
your example of having the, you know, the product team, the engineers on calls with customers. Here's where partnerships can take that to the next level. You get on a call with one individual customer and you understand that individual customer or some challenge or problem they're having with your product, which informs your product roadmap. And you start to see, I see. This is something I thought was easy, but it's not to customers. Got it. Or here's a feature they really want. But you only have so much time as a person working in product. You can't be on the phone all day long or on calls all day long with customers. Well, let's say you have a partner, an agency partner, and they work with dozens or hundreds of customers, and you get on a call with them and they can aggregate for you and they can say, here's what all of my customers hate about your product. Here's what all of my customers want your product to do. Here's what I hate about helping them set up your product every time I have this problem, because those are repeat. Those are
So
people who are using it on. So you kind of get the best of both worlds, right? You get that real, it's not aggregated data like you would get from a bunch of forms. It's that quality of feeling what people, the pain they feel in a real call, but feeling it from someone who feels it over and over and over again with multiple customers of your product instead of just one customer one time. So it's not an edge case. It's not a one-off. I think that's a really interesting way to kind of tap into the partner angle.
you just tied that together really well for product teams. So like another model is the ability to zoom in and zoom out and to know which frame of reference you're in, right? Are you zoomed into the problem? Or are you zoomed out, right? And be able to go back and forth seamlessly. And I think for product orgs, a lot of people just want to be in their zoomed in frame of reference, which is their own challenges or problems, right? Their own product roadmap, whatever. Like, I'm against product roadmaps. I'm generally not in favor of them at all. I don't think any company should have a product roadmap. You're living in a world that no longer exists if you do. I mean, that's its own opinion, and it's not just for me. Like, I learned this from like Elias at Drift, and when we had no product roadmap, and I was like, "That's stupid. How could we have no product roadmap?" And then you live in it, and you're like, "Oh, that's why." That makes a lot more sense now because we ship shit every day, right? We solve problems for customers every day. So what we were talking about, zooming in, zooming out, are these orders, from pioneering, and being on the frontier to farms to manufacturing to freeways. It's the same frame of reference for how you should think about living in market. It's like, okay, get out of your keyboard and your IDE, your independent development environment, or your product backlog in Asana or whatever, Jira, and talk to customers. So now you've got one frame of reference abstracted, like you're closer. And then get to the people to work with, 100 or even just 5, right? 5 customers. Then you have another layer of abstraction. So like you can get more intelligent on how you do that. And I think those are the product orgs of the future are going to be able to interoperate between, the job to be done in their code base, what their customers think, what their partners think, what the ecosystem feels, right? Like it's an entirely different thing. And right now we're just trying to push them up another layer, right?
What is your experience with?
But that's different than go to market though. So like product is, I don't really
Yep.
consider product go to market. Product's its own thing. We've talked about startup
Well,
day product.
it is go to market these days with these product led growth companies, right? Like you
Eh.
can't they can't sit
Eh.
out that conversation, right?
Yeah, I mean, it would be hard for me to throw shade at companies like Figma with the largest acquisition of all time, and say that that's anything other than a brilliant outcome. What I would say is, here's what I've seen. PLG has been an emergent phenomenon. I still don't know that it is a best practice that's being executed. I see much more go-to-market tomfoolery with spreadsheets and like trying to force the number than I do see PLG brilliance in market. I mean, there's some shining examples that just outshine everything else. And maybe that's the same with ecosystems, right? You see these companies have ecosystems, they kill everyone, or PLG flawlessly executed pretty much will beat old school B2B SaaS company.
Yeah.
But it's more than just, I think what PLG does is like, we're trying to solve for the customer. And then if you're thinking about it the right way, how do we layer sales and success and these other things on top of it? It's still not abstracted far enough to the market. Like, it's product-led growth. It's about me. That's why I don't like it.
Got
Like,
it.
why did PLG piss me off? Product-led growth, it starts with my product as the
That's
primary
why
good.
and the ones who do it well, what it actually is customer-led growth, right? They call it PLG, but the ones that are doing it well, that are winning at it, if I'm a customer, I'm like, I love it. I get to go use your product and play around with it. I don't have to go book a demo first. I don't feel like I'm playing by your rules to use it the way I want to. It feels like it's serving me, the ones who do it well, right? So
like Webflow, we talked about that on the last episode.
Yeah, that idea, that approach, I think is right. That's interesting with the terminology product. Yeah, that's interesting because it makes it about the product and not about the customer. The product is the star of the show, not the customer or not the community or ecosystem the customer lives in.
The market, right? Like, it's about you first. And that's why go-to market pisses me off. It's about me. It's about you. It's not about the world of which we live in. And we started this episode off, Isaac, talking about like the world changing and us shifting our business fundamentally. Now, we're a startup. So like, does that parallel to everyone? No, but those are the businesses that are going to survive and thrive, is that they respond and react to the market accordingly, not themselves, not their own problems. And that's why the other days are of particular interest in like what's going to happen in the future, you know?
Well, and that's where, I feel like sales, marketing, and startup are conversations that we have a lot of here. That's why I wanted to ask you specifically about product. And I want to ask you specifically about success in our last few minutes here, because I'm really curious what you see as success teams of the future that are partner led. I've talked to a few success managers recently, and some partner managers who are frustrated at success managers. And the partner manager I talked to was like, look, our success team, we could so much better serve our customers by handing a lot of them off to our partners to solve these problems that they're coming to our success team with. But our success team doesn't want to lose territory, doesn't want to lose influence, right? Doesn't want to lose headcount. I think that's an interesting point. I think we talked with Partner Page about this idea of turning, service requests into partner referrals. And this is awesome. This is great. But how do you combat that tendency, for a success department to say, no, we got to solve all the problems. We can't pass them up, right? Again, it's the same mindset. It's this idea of realizing you got to let go of some things. Like our last episode with Jill, you can't control everything. You got to let go of some things. You got to work with your partners. You're not going to be able to go alone. So what do you see? Like, where do you see examples of people who are already living in the future, success leaders, or just people who are thinking about the success, organization in a way that's going to survive the partner-led future?
There's some interesting things to talk about here. One will be franchises. Like, if we don't get into that, we should come back to franchises, franchisees. There's a lot to unpack there that I think has a lot of good analogies for like customer success, and how to think about that vis-a-vis partnerships and ecosystems. But the way that I might start this is a little bit different. Customer success, like what is customer success? I mean, so like, who are the thought leaders? Who are the people evangelizing and talking about it? I mean, I'm a recent fan of like Gain, Grow, Retain by Jay Nathan. And he's like, customer success is a company priority, not a department one. Completely agree. Customer success is the only priority. It is the only priority. You might put partners and like ecosystem as like under that same umbrella. You might directly monetize partners in your ecosystem, but it tends to be that like, we're talking about the same thing, right? Like, at the end of the day, that ultimate customer success has nothing to do with you, and it has more to do with them, right? They're more important than you are. You don't exist without them. Okay, now we're starting at the right premise. Here's the problem with that. Who do you sell to? Okay, I don't care. If you're listening, who do you sell to? Think about it. Name that persona. Is it a VP of engineering? Is it a data warehouse manager? Is it head of sales? Is it freaking agricultural, manufacturer, right? It doesn't matter who it is. Now, let me ask you the next question. Who is servicing them? Who is delivering their success? Is this a 25-year-old, 3 years out of college, with no professional work experience in that field? Oh, it is. Interesting. So, how is that person that has never done the job that they're advising and helping the customer with going to be that effective consultant to help them run their business better? They're not. They can't, and they aren't. So let's just take MarTech for an example, since I was at Drift and I saw this a lot. The best CSMs in the world, and I saw some of them, incredible CSMs. Like shout out Taylor from Drift. Like she was phenomenal. She got decent at Marketo. She got decent at some of these other things that we played with. But at the end of the day, when it came to like actually running a more effective marketing strategy, she's in her mid-20s and she's talking to a VP of marketing and a CMO that's been doing this for 20 years. Why would you not bring the people to the table that have that track record, who've walked a mile in those shoes, who've done those things, and build, let's say, a 1 + 1 = 3, you have the experience, and then let's say we have the process, the IP, right? The intellectual property, the software, to where you have the tacit knowledge and we have the software knowledge to make our customers more successful. Those are the companies that clearly win. I mean, just Microsoft, that's just one word. So it's always amazed me, Isaac, how much ego we have whenever it comes to customer success. We think that we can hire low-cost resources and scale a bunch of them so we control the customer, and yet none of them are experts in our customers' businesses. Now you might say, oh, enterprise, we have solutions engineers, right? We have paid resources that are really good at doing what our customers want them to do. Yeah, for your product, but you don't have VP level people doing work for VP level customers. You just don't. But guess what you do as a consultancy or an agency, right? You do have those people doing that work.
That's interesting. You said for your product. You think about when you're facing a problem and you're trying to get a product to do something for you. Someone who only knows every in and out of that product is very limited in what they can do to help you. Someone who knows at a higher level the type of problem you're trying to solve in general, even the parts of it that don't have to do with specific things your product can and can't do. Like that's where that value comes in. And you're right, that's a great point, that you can't expect, that doesn't make economic sense to have a customer success team that has that level of knowledge and expertise, where you can absolutely get that in your network of partners. That's really interesting. Yeah. And Gain, Grow, Retain, Jay Nathan, he's gonna be speaking at the PLX summit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're gonna tap into some of this stuff. Hey, I appreciate this. I know you were like, I was like, Jared, we gotta talk about this partner-led everything stuff. And you're like, yeah, but we talk about this stuff. Like, no. I have more. Like I have so much more. This has already been really interesting for me, but there's so much more I need to tease out. So we're gonna get into all that obviously at the summit, but even in in future episodes leading up to that, like I want to dive in even more to. I feel like we're just scratching the surface. What I'm trying to say in terms of the other departments outside of partnerships itself, what it means for them, what the future means for them.
Yeah, and that's why partner led. What does that mean? It means that we're thinking about the people that have the trust, the relationships, the influence, but really the expertise that surrounds the customer and how we deliver value through these functions, right? Day one, capital, right? Startup. So it's founders and VCs, private equity, whatever, right? So if you're a founder, you can use capital through bootstrapping yourself or VCs, whatever. Day two, product. You're using that the same way all the way through the entire experience, is that you have this expertise as a product leader. You have this expertise as a marketing leader, as a sales leader, not just on the function of your business, but what your customer is trying to do. And I think I'm excited. It mark my words, it will be the biggest event of next year.
Until next time, man. I stole your intro. Maybe you should just like do an outro then.
I think I do peace out, partner up every time. So partner up. We'll see you at plxsummit.com and the future of partner-led everything. If you haven't downloaded if you haven't got the Spotify playlist either, by the way, go get it. PLX on Spotify. I've just been listening to synthwave nonstop, and
it's fire. We're living in the future, at least what the 80s thought the future was going to be. So,
all right, partner up. Peace out. We will see you all next time.